Well, you see, Ben, after I made that air-conditioned nightmare trip, I had seen a good deal of the country. I spent a good year traveling around, you know. And when I got to California, I found it was much more congenial to me than other parts of the country. It just hit me right. And then, as
Were
I
you
tell
up
you...
on your luck or down on your luck?
Oh, it had nothing to do with that. It was entirely aside and apart from any material question. I was really down in that whole year and a half I spent in Beverly Glen outside of Hollywood. Why, I was living like a dog. I even had to send out that appeal for help in which I promised to people that if they would send me whatever they could, money, clothing, food, anything, I would send them a watercolor. And I did, you know. I kept that up for over a year. I sent everyone who sent me, whether it was $1 that I got, I sent them as good a watercolor as I could make. Do you know? Do you remember that time?
Sure, the plight of the creative artist.
That was a wonderful period, Ben. Wonderful, because I got a real response, do you see, from people. People I didn't know either, who didn't even know me as a writer, hadn't even read my books. They had just read that there was an American writer who was in distress, and they came across.
I remember reading Plight of the Creative Artist, and you make a point there. You say, I'm not going to be betrayed by some commercial enterprise or sit in an advertising agency scribbling stuff I don't feel, right?
Yes, right.
You want to be a creative artist, and therefore part of creativity is to be free, is that right?
That's right.
So you say, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to take so many dollars a week to be betrayed.
Yeah.
How did you put it?
Well, I said, if you had a daughter, would you put her out on the street as a prostitute and then marry her later and say, well, what difference does it make? She's all right, you know, she had to earn a living. We had to have the money, do you see, but it's all right. Let's forget about it. Well, I feel it's much the same way when you start out to be an artist. If first you do all the wrong things because you need to live, you have no excuse, really. You have always the privilege to starve. Do you see? That sounds funny, I suppose. But I mean, people say, well, if you don't do this or that, you'll die. Well, why can't you die, do you see? What's so terrible about it? Take a chance. Go near to the edge, do you see? As a matter of fact, you are not going to die. Who dies of starvation in this country, or any country almost? Only in Asia do we hear that. You know, people do die there by the thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands at times. But not in America, do you see? Nobody will let you down that much, will let you really die in the gutter of hunger, huh?
But there are other deaths, Henry.
That's right. That's right. By the way, near starvation, I know from experience, is far worse than this real starvation which comes through famine, don't you know, and drought, where people really die like flies. But to be half-starved every day, which I would say, from the time I began to write, let's say a good 15 years, Ben, I was half-starved. That meant I got a meal every day somehow or other, don't you know? But never knew how, when, or why, do you know?
You'd scrounge.
Always waiting for it to come, do you know? That's far worse, I think.
Well, then that's a pretty tough way to live, and a man would fight against that and say, well, I guess I'll take this job in this
that's right.
hack work.
That's right. It is the great temptation. Sure it is. Sure it is. I took the other route. Maybe you could say I was, more cowardly in one sense, or less moral. I preferred to go out and beg, and I did that too. I went out on the streets in Brooklyn, near where I lived, at night, and would ask a guy for a dime. Give me a dime, do you see? Help me out. I'm
up against it.
Yeah, yeah.
What did you find about people when you did
But, by the way, I found that was just as hard work as taking a job. yeah, that's just as bad, you know. You don't beat the game anyway, you know. Listen, After all, after it's all said and done, after all the experiences, now if you could relive your life, you know, I would say, what the hell? I could go out, I could be a plumber, a carpenter, a bricklayer, a street cleaner, or anything. I could do that and write. But I say that now, after, do you see what I mean? I could not do it then. There were emotional reasons, there were psychological reasons, do you see? Perhaps the most important thing was that I had always dreamed and hoped that I could be one day a writer. And when I uttered that word, to be a writer, it had great import to me. It wasn't just a writer, it was writer, the writer, you know, the greatest writer. That really is it, you know, a sort of wild dream like that. And there was a pride connected with it, I suppose. I put up this fight for, I suppose, for a principle, you know, that I didn't voice particularly.
You mean in this pamphlet that you wrote?
No, I mean to myself early in life, because born in Brooklyn, of parents who didn't have anything to do with artists and so on, never meeting any artists, fighting to meet any people with any culture, do you see? Why, to me, it was like saying, I'm going to be a saint or a martyr or a god or something. It was just as big and just as far away, as remote as that, do you see? I only dared dream about it for many years. I didn't even think I had the ability, but it was the one and only thing I wanted to do. And yet, to do it, I did 1,000 other things first.
Name a few.
Name a few. Streetcar conductor, garbage collector, librarian, insurance and book salesman, do you see?
What does the telegraph office mean that runs through your novels?
The telegraph office, by that time I was already married and had a child, and I had just been fired from one of the first few promising positions that I was able to wangle in a mail order house. I was made the sub-editor, or editor and assistant editor, rather, of this magazine of the Charles Williams stores. I've only got it a month. The man above me likes me immensely. He's a literary man. He believes in me, though I haven't written a line, but he knows I'm somebody. And I learn it all so quickly that there's nothing for me to do. So I have Nietzsche in front of me, whom I'm then passionate about, and I'm copying out excerpts from the Antichrist. And suddenly the vice president walks through, looks over my shoulder, and I don't even know he's there, and he unrolls it from the machine, like right over my shoulder. He looks at it. The Antichrist, very interesting. You know, and what connection has this, Mr. Miller, with your work? And I look up and of course I say, none whatever. I'm caught red-handed,
Sure.
Fired, you know. Then I was out. I had a wife, a child, and I had a house to support and all that. So then, in desperation, I go and ask for a messenger job in the Western Union. I, who am then about, what, in my 30s, don't you know? And, no, I'm wrong. I'm about 28. I asked for a job as a messenger, and they turned me down. That so incenses me that I can't sleep. I get up the next morning, and I decide to see President Carlton, the head of the Western Union. And I ask him, I get to his office, they refer me to the vice president's office, and I say, why can't I get the lowest job on earth, a messenger boy?
Did you get in to see the president?
Yes, the vice president. I was referred to the vice president's office. And I get this job. They finally turn me over to the manager of the whole city, who listens to me for an hour or more. And instead of being offered a job as messenger, he said, Mr. Miller, why don't you take over the personnel department? You be the manager of the messenger department. Do you see? But first, he said, in order to give you experience, put on a uniform, work as a messenger, and I'll send you from office to office, you see, on a special. You'll get paid as the employment manager. Nobody will know it but us two, but you'll work as a messenger. So I went from office door, and I got the lay of the land, the feeling of it, don't you know? And then I knew, too, very well what that life was, do you see? To tell you the truth, I could hardly stand it. It was winter, snow and ice on the ground. I came home the first night as though my feet were made of, you know, broken bones and glass, do you see? I went to bed groaning, you know, from the pain.
Well, you were just another guy with a job and a family.
That's right, that's right.
That's a long way from a bohemian left-bank writer.
Oh, yes, yes. Well, you see, I hadn't yet come to that point where I had made my resolution to live this other life, do you see? There are a lot of things happened, Ben, at that time.
Sure.
First place, I fell in love with another woman, was caught red-handed, was divorced, do you see? And I lived with her. And then, while living with her, I quit my job. I one day walked into the Western Union. There was the great moment, and it was through my wife, that new wife, that I got the courage to make my final decision and to live by it. She really buoyed me up and helped me. She knew that I was a writer and wanted me to be one, do you see? And she pushed me into it, you might say. So one day I went to the office. I took all my private things out and put them in a briefcase. I said, I don't want my salary that's due me. I left a note. I said, hand this to the manager. I'm quitting right now. The office was full of boys waiting to be hired, you know. There were always 50 or 60 milling around. It was a pandemonium. It was at 23rd Street, the Flatiron. I'll never forget it. But I walked out that day and I felt I am a free man. And I deliberately walked up Broadway. It was about 10 in the morning to watch all the other people with their briefcases under their arm going in, soliciting, selling, you know, buying and selling and praying and hoping and begging. And I said, never, not for me. I'll never do this. Now I'm going to be a writer, and I'll live or die by it, you know. And then began the 10-year period when I really did suffer and starve, do you see, until my first book came out. 10 years.
When'd you get to Paris?
In 1930. I had gotten there in 1928, first on a trip through all Europe with no thought of remaining, just it was a holiday. I spent 1 year going all over Europe. Then we came back, remained a year, and in 1930, of February of that year, I left my wife in New York. She raised the money for me to get a passage, and I left with no money. I had to borrow at the last minute a $10 bill so that I had something to tip the, you know, on the boat. Landed in London with my wife's promise that she'd mail me money there, do you see, and I could get on to Paris and so on.
How did you live in Paris that first, when you got there? Where did you live?
Well, you know, I told all that, you know, at some length in the Tropic of Cancer. I lived from street to street, hotel to hotel, one studio to another, from day to day, in other words. I had no carte d'identité for over a year. I had no address, no regular address. I got up in the morning, always without any money in my pocket, walked down to Boulevard Montparnasse, Café Dome, the Select, the Rotund, looking, as I always say, for a friendly face. And I got almost to be like a criminal, like a pickpocket or something, could read faces. Is he my ticket, my meal ticket? Is he the guy who will help me, do you see? I could size them up pretty well. Usually they were American or English, now and then Russian, never a Frenchman. I never would dream of tackling a Frenchman, don't you know?
Didn't you find yourself telling lies and living a false life?
Oh, I don't think anything of that, Ben. You see, even to this day, I can still tell a lie if needs be, and I think nothing of it. I consider certain lies are white lies, do you know? A lie that isn't intended to do any harm, do you see, but where you preserve yourself in an emergency, I think it's justifiable. And no, I never had any feeling of guilt about that. Certainly I told many tall stories, all kinds, yes.